Hi guys, Alex from MUD.clayplay here in Byron Bay. So here for the next isoclaytion edit, making bits and pieces from your kitchen table with your hands, so clay hand building. The topic for today, or the shape that we're going to be making, is just your general kitchen utensils, so like spoons, things like that. I'm actually going to be making these three things. I've taken these from the kitchen. So we've got a soup ladle, we've got a pasta strainer, and we've got just a giant spoon. So you can also use the method that I'm going to show you to make smaller versions of these, so smaller spoons and things like that, that you can use for all sorts of things, just for display or cheese platters or whatever you want. So I'll go through what you are actually going to need. So we're going to need a bit of water. It doesn't have to be in a spray bottle like this, but it can be. You can just have it in a dish as well, and you can use your fingers to grab that. We might need this probably, maybe, not sure. So you've got your rolling pin from your kitchen as well. Just grab that just in case. We've got this guy here, so I've just got a clean cloth that I can basically work on so that my clay doesn't get stuck to my board. That's very important because it's super annoying when the clay gets stuck to the board. We've also got these three guys, which we use pretty much every time. Whoops, a bit windy. So we've got our joining tool here. So we've got the curvature there that allows us to join two bodies of clay together. And you can also use a spoon from a little baby spoon that has the same curvature if you don't have these tools. We've got this guy here, which is our scoring tool, so our little scoring needle. We can do the crosshatch on two bodies of clay to lock them together. You can also use this for cutting. I use this for slicing the clay as well, so that's really handy. The thing that you can replace that with is just your general kitchen knife that you can cut with and score with. This is a trimming tool where you can trim clay that you don't need away from your shape, but I also use it for decorating. So to replace this, to trim the clay, you can again just use your knife. And some people have just bent a little bit of wire around on itself to create that curvature so they can do little grooves in their clay. You're also going to need a little dish here. So the reason you're going to need a dish is so you can actually pop mud in it and spray that with water to create a mud consistency, so a bit of a toothpaste consistency, and we're going to use this to help join two shapes together as well. So that's kind of our glue, the slit. So I reckon we should get started. Now, these are designed obviously for people to do at home with their friends or with their family, or just by yourself as a little mediclation. And especially they're obviously completely free, especially for those in Melbourne at the moment and in parts of the world that are in lockdown and pretty affected by COVID. I understand that it can be incredibly distressing having to basically be at home and not have that freedom to be able to go out and about. It can feel scary, it can feel like a lot of things. So to break up the day by doing little tasks and doing these types of activities can actually take the edge off a little bit. So yeah, share it with your friends in Melbourne. If they want to do it, great. By no means do they have to buy a kit from us. They can at the website www.mudbyronbay.com, but they don't have to. If they've already got clay, if they've already got tools or just kitchen utensils, no worries. They can do these for sure. But if they want to, they can grab toolkits, which include everything on the website. So the tools, the clay, and the glazes. And the website also includes kiln locations around the place. And for those that are in lockdown or unable to access a kiln for some time, your clay is going to be fine. Your shapes are going to be fine. They can sit there drying out for months before you take them to a kiln. So you don't necessarily need to do that in a super timely manner. So that's not a problem. We've also got a bunch of frequently asked questions on the website. But if you have a question that is not answered on there, just let me know, just email, DM, whatever, and then I can actually add that answered question to the FAQs as well. So let's get started. So I've got a tiny ball here. So if you've got one of the mud balls that's over 1 kilo, you want to probably break that into like, you know, seven or 8 sections to make what we're going to make today. So this is really quite small. And what I've done is I've used my palms here to actually kind of bang that into shape. So I'm just going for basically a little ball shape, because we're going to use the pinch technique. So we've got 3 core hand building techniques. Today we're going to use a bit of the pinch technique and also the coil technique. So both those things. So I've got my little ball there. So some of you that have done their isoclations in the past might know pinch pots, but what shape do I want to make to begin with? I reckon I want to make this guy here to begin with, my little soup ladle. So I'm going to need to make this base first before I do anything else. So that is a little pinch pot. So I'm grabbing my ball, I'm pressing my thumb 3/4 the way down and supporting with this hand here, so pressing that down. And then to actually create this into a tiny little bowl shape, I'm going to want to pinch and pinch and pinch and continue that all the way around, and just be really mindful of the shape that I'm making. As you're pinching, this portion of your hand here really starts to build the shape. So if I'm pulling up, my bowl is going to come up. If I'm pulling out, my bowl is really going to be much more shallow and it's going to come out. As you're doing this, just be mindful, just feel where the clay is at between your fingers, because sometimes you can't really see it. You'll get the hang of feeling the thickness of the clay rather than seeing the thickness of the clay, so that you can create that even thickness all the way around the bowl. So I'm going to do this now. So I'm just going to pull gently up. I'm not going to pull all the way up to the top. If I do, then my top's going to become quite thin. The lid of my shape is going to become quite thin. So I'm just going to continue to pinch. And I'm kind of pulling out a little bit as well, because I don't want this to be too high. I want it to really be a little bit more shallow. So for me, the natural language of my hands is to actually pull things upward instead of outward. So I'm really using this portion of my hand to pinch outward like this, using my eyes just to check to see where I need to pinch a little bit more, and also my fingers just to feel the thickness of the clay. Oh, it's a bit windy out here. And I just keep spinning it around, so you can see that I'm just spinning it around, and I'm actually pulling clay from the bottom here up. You might not need to do that if you don't have extra clay at the bottom, so just feel where you've got the extra clay. Also, I'm keeping in mind that your shape is going to reduce about 20% in the kiln once the moisture is wicked away from it. So just keep that in mind when you're making something that you want it to be a particular size, because it will shrink. Not a crazy amount, but 20%. So I'm going to use both my hands now just to kind of pull out the bottom. I'm not sure if you can hear all those cars. Soon you'll hear the soothing sounds of the construction workers. That'll be great. So my clay up the top, a little bit windy, my clay up the top is cracking. That's okay. I'm going to sort that out in a minute once I've got my shape that I'm happy with. Just spinning this around. Now the thickness, I'm probably, I don't want it to be too thick because it's a spoon. I actually don't want it to be too heavy, but this is quite a good shape. I'm relatively happy with that. pretty good. I could do it a little bit bigger if I wanted, but I don't really want to. Alright, so if I want to have a bit of consistency with the lip, so some people's lips kind of go up and down. Some people love that. If you love it, keep it, no worries. But if you want the consistency with the height, flip it over, just gently on there, and then you can see that that's actually leveled out my little bowl there. Now I am actually going to need the water, so spraying that on my hands so that I can actually start to press. See, I've got cracks everywhere, it's normal. So I just want to start to press these together. Any cracks that you have are going to accentuate in the kiln. You want to make sure you don't have any cracks. The clay we're using is a BRT, and we fire it at a mid-fire so that you can get all the little freckles appearing out. Some people don't use a BRT for like dinnerware and things like that because it can be quite rough, but we love it. If you have used the BRT and you've had a fired shape and it's quite rough on the bottom, you don't want it to scratch your table. So what you want to do is you can go to Bunnings and you can get a little sanding stone, and you can sand the bottom, all of those rough bits off. Or if you've got two pieces, like two mugs for example, that both have the trachyte coming out on the bottom, the unevenness, you can just scratch them together and eventually they'll become much smoother. So just, you know, choose your flavor and smooth out that bottom just so it doesn't scratch your table. So here I'm just really spending my time, and I'm pressing those cracks together. I'm not just going over it like this and accentuating them. And if I need more water, I'm spraying it onto my hands, and I'm just going around, taking my time, pressing those together. It's not a race, you know. If you find yourself doing it really quite quickly and you've got like a shortness of breath, I mean, that just kind of denotes where you're at stress-wise. So perhaps just try and slow it down as best you can. Sometimes it feels a bit stressful if you're not getting the right shape you want, but if you can kind of let go from the expectation of exactly how you want it to look and just see how it turns out, and everything looks 10 times better once it's been glazed and is complete. So just keep that in mind. So I've kind of got the cracks out of the top. I'm going to flip this over because I'm actually going to work on the cracks around here now. How I do that is I use a bit of a circular motion. If I were to press too hard, I'd squash my shape, so I really want to be quite gentle when I'm doing this. I just want to work these cracks out because the clay that I'm using, it's not super dry, but it does have it's not the wettest clay that I've ever worked with, so it just does have a little bit of crackage happening. I'm just going to work those cracks out. This morning. Now I'm going to lift this up and I'm going to use my hand here to actually, on the flowers. I'm going to use my hand here to support whilst I'm just working some of these harder cracks out. Now I want to work on my shape a bit more. I want it to be a bit rounder, so I'm just going to press really gently. If I press too hard, I'd rip the clay. Just want that to be a little bit more rounded. as I'm doing this, I've got some other cracks appearing. That's okay, just going to keep on working on that. So people that have done some of these before already know about the music playlists, the Isoclaytion and Mud Fridays 1 on Spotify. They are banging playlists to chuck on when you're doing this sort of stuff. The best, my best work, my finest work. So MUD.clayplay on Spotify, but just type in Mud Fridays 1 or isoclaytion and it will come up. So once you're happy with your little, I mean really this is a bowl at the moment, and pretty happy with my shape of that. So I'm just going to pop this to one side. You can see that shape there, and it's always going to be, I mean you can see the light catching, you know, the little sections that I've pressed. I love that. It's what I love about hand building. You can tell that it's been made by somebody's hands. So next I'm going to make this section of the ladle, and the way that I do that is I'm going to roll out a coil. So a coil is just a worm. I'm going to grab a bunch of my clay here. You can also roll out a sheet of clay and cut that out, which is a really good idea if you want it to be kind of a really particular shape, but I actually want mine to be less flat than that. I want mine to be a bit rounder. So I'm just going to say goodbye to my board for a second. And I'm going to use the table. You probably won't want to use your table to do this, which is fine. So do it on the board, but I'm just kind of creating that shape. Oh, here's the lovely sounds of the angle grinder. Now, how I do this, if I pressed down too hard, I'd squash the shape. So I just want to really gently start from the middle with my fingers, put a little bit of pressure on it, not too much, and then start to work it out. And just continue this process until I have the thickness that I want. Now, me personally, I want a little bit of thickness, not too much, but a little bit, so that there's a bit of structural integrity to this soup ladle. Certainly not something I'm going to be kind of smashing around because it'll break, but I don't want it to snap just by me picking it up. So of course this is ceramic, you still have to be careful with the things that you make. So windy. Thought this morning was going to be a good choice. What do I think? So I've got a little worm there. I'm just going to use this to, yeah, it's pretty good, that thickness, and I might press it out a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to press mine out just with my fingers a bit, just to make it a bit more flat. But for me, I'm okay with the little dents that I'm making at the moment. Some people would absolutely hate that. I'm okay with those little dents. I kind of think that it makes it cool. Now I am going to have to join this in quite a particular way. I also, as I mentioned before, I want this little section here. So I am going to create that now. How long do I want this here? Probably that long. So I've just pulled off the section of clay that I don't need, just like that. And I am going to press this out because I want to make this section a little bit wider than the rest. because I am going to be, I can't make it too thin either, because if I'm cutting a hole in it and I'm expecting to be able to hang this somewhere, I am going to again need a little bit of weight to it. So you can see there, that's thicker than the rest of the shape. I'm just going to make it a bit rounder by just manipulating it with my fingers. And once I'm happy with the shape that I've made there, I can use my cutting tool here, hair in my mouth from all that wind, just to cut out the section that I don't need in the middle. And then I use my fingers just to kind of soften that a little bit. Just using my fingers now just to soften this hole that I've created. You can even use this, press this into the hole and just, again, not making it too wide, not making these sections around here too thin, or you'll hang it on something and it'll just snap. So just working on that until you're happy. So I have used this section to really help me out with this hole, just to kind of make it consistent. I'll show you just like that. It's pretty consistent. And now you are going to need your board and your cloth, because we're going to need to rest it on here in a very particular shape so that it can set properly. Now it's probably a bit long, I might want to make that slightly shorter. So again, I use my little cutting tool wherever that's gone, over here. So figure out on here where you want to put this. The longer it is, the more likely it will snap. So I'm just going to cut it there. I'm going to press this out, just like this. So you can see that I am creating a section that I can actually join to my ladle. I can't expect this to just stick to there. It's not going to work. I need to stick this entire section to my ladle there. Okay, so just like that. Now, to join two bodies of clay together, we can't just join two sections of clay and stick them together, because they'll likely, when they dry, click apart. We want to score both of the bodies of clay that we want to stick together pretty thoroughly. We also want to use our slip. So I need to figure out here where I need to actually score. And just gonna throw a bit of slip on there. If your slip is too dry, you just want to add a little bit more water to it. You're not going to need too much, and I only need to do it on one section. I don't need to do it on both. Then I can flip both of these over and start my join. I'm just going to press these really gently together. Now this is a part where you do need to support the inside of your vessel, of your little dome that you've made, because if I press with this, it's going to basically dent the shape in. So now I'm just going to pull this clay onto my dome shape. do this pretty thoroughly because this is your join. This is your join for both of these shapes. And this is why you need that extra clay to actually have around the join section so you can stick it to there. Now I'm going to turn this over, whoops, quite gently, because I also need to join that section there. You can maybe or maybe not see that there is this section here that hasn't been joined properly. I'm actually going to reinforce it with a tiny coil. So I'm just going to make a very tiny version of this to stick these two shapes together, or assist in the sticking of these two shapes together. Just place that there. So I've placed my tiny coil just above the lip of my little dome and also on top of my ladle. So the coil that I just made. Now I'm going to use the curved end, not the other end. I'm not going to hack at it. I'm just going to use this to pull these shapes together and reinforce that join. So the more you reinforce that join, the more likely this little shape that you're making isn't going to break, which is ideal. Now if you want to soften this out a little bit, again, a little bit of water on the fingers and you can just soften any little scratches out that you've popped in the clay. So you can see that this is on quite the angle, and this is actually at a right angle. I want it to be somewhat the same. So I'm just going to use a little dry section of clay that I'm not going to need so much. Whoops. Just a bit of clay on the ground. Whoopsie. And what I can do now is I can actually use this to prop up my shape, just to support it where I actually want it to be. So you see now, gosh, so windy. You see now that's at a right angle. So I can just make sure that it's the shape that I want it to be. And if I want to, I can actually add in another coil. Just again, reinforcing that join. Doing a little scoring here. And scoring my little worm. Adding it in there and then reinforcing that join once again. Really should have put my hair up. I'm pretty happy with that, to be honest. And now what I need to do for any drying of your work, of the shapes that you're making, you, if this starts to droop as well, if this section starts to droop, don't worry about it. In a couple of hours time, some moisture will have wicked away from it. It will solidify a little bit and then you can just gently reshape that. Now you want to dry all of your shapes indoors, out of the elements. If I was to dry it outside with wind, the wind might come in from this section and dry one portion of the clay more quickly than it's drying another portion, and that kind of creates cracks in the clay. You don't want that, it's very disappointing. So if you just pop it inside, out of the elements, out of direct sunlight, you'll be good to go. And you know, depending on your weather, I mean, it might take a week to dry. This has to be entirely dry, like bone dry, before you take it to a kiln. Once again, the kilns are located on the website. The type of clay and the type of glaze is also located in the FAQ section of the website. Please visit there. It shows you exactly what you need to do. Contact your kiln operator before taking any of your bits and pieces in, just so that they're not overrun. They will ask you what type of clay you're using, which is a BRT. We fire it in mid-fire, and you're using a cone 6 glaze, just so you can get that little freckle effect. So the white cone 6 glaze. So, I nearly broke it, but it's hard for me to show you properly, but that's kind of your ladle. Very cute. So, just going to pop that to one side, and you can use that method to make anything really. A small spoon, a large spoon. This one is obviously just much smaller. So, if we were to make that, we would again just need a body of clay, and we can do the same method with the pinch, but we will be pulling out a little bit more rather than up like we did with our ladle. So I'm just nurturing out those cracks, rolling that into my ball, and now I'm going to be pressing down, and I'm going to be pulling out as I'm going around. And I actually want this to be a bit longer than I do wide, so I'm kind of using my fingers to just force that shape, the length in that shape with this spoon. And using this section of my hand just to press the shape down rather than up into that spoon, large spoon shape. I'm using both my hands here, just being really aware and mindful of where the thick sections of my clay are and where I actually want to pull those thick sections. To make that kind of spoon shape that I'm after. Now I don't want to make this too thin, maybe 0.5 of a centimetre. Again, if you're making anything too thin, it's much more likely that it will just break. Now, same deal with the water and just nurturing out those cracked lip sections. So just going around my spoon. Mine's kind of created its own shape, which I'm okay with. Quite like it. It's still somewhat an oval, which is what I was going for. But, you know, you let go from the expectation of it being exactly the form that you are intending. The language of your hands will just kind of take over a little bit. So everyone that's doing this isoclaytion, you know, I'm giving the same instructions. Everyone's going to have entirely different results, which I think is pretty cool. So you can see here that I'm kind of creating that spoon shape. And I'm just continually working the clay until those cracks are out and I'm kind of happy with the shape that I've made. So I'm just working the cracks on the outside now. little hairline fractures will always accentuate. Any sharp edges or hairline cracks, fractures will accentuate in the kiln, so just keep that in mind. Just take the time to be rid of them. Now, if you're doing a part of this and then you have to, you know, go and tend to something else, like put your kids to bed or whatever, just use a damp cloth and place that over your work so the atmosphere isn't wicking moisture away from it and you can't go back to it and then continue to work on it. You want to keep that clay moist. So this is a bit of a, some people would slice to make the exact shape that they wanted to. I'm not going to do that because I quite like when it's a little bit wonky. So we're making wonky shapes. And I'm just kind of, you know, figuring out. So you can see there, and then I'll add, much like I did with the other one, I'll just add that shape on and reinforce that join. But I mean, I'm pretty happy with that shape for a spoon, to be honest. Like a large spoon, it's quite cool. Just checking that my cracks are out. So now pop that to one side, grab my clay, squeeze that into, we all know what that looks like, but squeeze that into that shape. And again, same deal. You're creating your large coil. Oh, I've got some birds over there, that's nice. Now, for you guys, I mean, this table has been made for me for clay, but I would not recommend doing it on your own table at home if it's porous. You do want to protect your table. So just going to gently keep on working this until I have the shape that I'm after. And the size that I'm after. So for people that haven't done this much before, it fires in stages. So I mean, your first stage is not a firing stage, it's the drying stage. So you want to, oh my god, the windiest isoclaytion ever. You want to let it dry for, you know, until it's bone dry, at least a week. If it's really cold to the touch, like really cold and still seems a bit damp, it ain't dry yet. So leave it to dry, and then you've got your biscuit firing stage, or your bisque firing. So that's just over 1,000 degrees that it will be fired at. You do not want to glaze your shape before you have done your first firing. You'll ruin it. So first firing, biscuit firing, and then you're able to glaze your shape. You don't want to glaze the bottom of your shape. So with these shapes that we're making, we do not want to glaze the bottom of these shapes, because if the glaze hits the kiln shelf, it will fuse to it, and you can separate them, but it's incredibly difficult, and it's just not something that the kiln operators appreciate at all. So it's quite expensive, kiln shelves, so we want to make sure that we're not glazing our shapes incorrectly. I can even do another little glaze tutorial as well, just to show people. I mean, I'm pretty happy with, and that's like way too long, but I'm pretty happy with that size, I think. And once again, I'm just going to do that little pressing thing that I did before, just to flatten that out slightly. Pop that to one side. Bring back this here and figure out, I'm probably going to need another one of these actually to for the length of the spoon that I want to do. So I want to do it a pretty similar length to this because I want a bit of consistency with the things that I'm making. So I'm going to grab another board. Where are we? Here we go. Another board. How handy. And I'm also going to grab another one of these little sheets in a tick, but I would urge you to grab the sheet before you're doing all of this. Just going to chuck this to one side. But I'm just going to do it on there and change it around after. Whoops. So, I've got my shape. I've got my flattened coil. And now I'm just going to figure out how long I want this. So, the length. I'm just going to measure it up against my other piece. Pull off what I don't need. So again, I'm going to flatten out a portion of this clay so I can actually attach that to my spoon, and I just want to triple check that it's going to be the same size as, yeah, pretty much same size. So attach that. I'll attach that bowl section to the section that I just flattened out. But first I'm going to create the same little rounded section at the top of my shape so that I can then cut that hole like we did with the ladle. So I'm going to use my, again, my scoring tool just to cut out a tiny section. I don't want to go too crazy on that because it's easier for me to remove more clay than it is to add clay in. So I'm going to use this other section here just to hollow that out, and then my fingers just to soften the edges there on both of the sides of my shape. If you need a little bit of water, go for it, not too much. The glaze also softens out the clay a bit as well. Just measuring it up against my other one. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy with that. Certainly not perfect, but it's good enough. So again, same deal. I'm attaching my spoon to the top of my spoon to the handle. So again, we're doing that crosshatch situation, and we're figuring out where we need to score on the base of this shape here. And again, what the crosshatch does is it helps those two bodies of clay actually lock together properly. We use a little bit of our slip, and again, our slip is just our wet clay at a toothpaste consistency. I'm going to chuck a little bit of that in here. Alright, that should be enough. And then I'm going to figure out where I want Yep, that's good. So again, flip this over so we can properly complete the joint. And again, I'm actually going to lift this up and place my fingers underneath so I'm not messing up the shape that you've just spent a lot of time creating. And I'm going to pull the clay from this section onto this section. And I'm going to get all of the hair out of my face as well. Extra clay that I can get rid of. And I'm going to spray my fingers again and just spray my other fingers and just smooth out what I've just done. Trick is you don't want this section of your handle to actually be too thin. If it is, it will likely snap, because that is where the pressure is when you're holding it, is this join section here, because it's holding together basically your handle on to the larger portion of your clay, so there is weight there. Now, you need to be careful with this not to break the join, so I'm just really gently going to turn that over now. My clay's cracking a little bit. And once again, I'm going to do a little coil, score the coil, score the section of clay that I'm actually pressing it into, and again use my joining tool to join really gently so I'm not manipulating the shape that I've actually made. But I do want to use this to just reinforce. And I'm going up and down, I'm pulling clay onto the handle, and I'm also pulling clay from that coil onto the spoon. Being mindful that there's an underneath section as well, so I want to make sure that I am joining all of that clay and using a little bit of water on the fingers again just to nurture that clay out again, nurture any of the cracks out. Just then reform the shape. Just make sure you're reforming the shape, and because it's going to dry in whatever shape you leave it in. So you can, if you want to, get a little bit of clay and prop this up. If you want the spoon to kind of have a little bit of curvature to it. I'm just figuring out whether I want to do that. I'm not sure what I'm trying to go for. I actually quite like that the spoon is straight, so I'm not going to do that, but you can. You do whatever you want. So again, we've got our spoon. It's quite cool. So we've got the reinforced join here, we've got our pinch section there, and then we've got our section up here where we can hang it from somewhere if we want to. So very cute. Great. Now you can use this method to do small versions of this. You can use the same method to actually create this guy here. So when you create your pinch bowl, then you want to use this guy to actually cut out these sections here. But you're still using the same method as what we did with our other two shapes. So we've got our spoon as well as our ladle. Very cute. So once again, on Instagram at MUD.clayplay. I would love for you, oh my hair's going crazy. I would love for you to share your shapes with me, please. It just lights up my life. Send them to me on Instagram or tag me in a story or a photo or whatever. I would absolutely love that. Thank you so much for doing the isoclaytion edit, our community connection, social connection project for mental health. If you have any questions, let me know, but do check out the FAQ section as I mentioned on the website, and have fun creating shapes, and we'll have another one in 2 weeks time. Okay, bye guys.